Hello, it's me, Marilia, and today I'm going to do something on this video that's a little different. First of all, I'm going to warn you ahead of time that I'm probably going to go down one, maybe two little tiny rants, and they're just motivated by my sense of frustration and anger, as I'm sure we all share about these kinds of things. But my main focus here is going to be to kind of think about the victims. None of us try to ignore the victims. I think that we do not focus on them because the impact of the tragic events that ultimately ends their life is actually psychologically, I think, too much for any of us to really hold in our minds. I think that the entire attraction to true crime, period, is because I think we try to find safety in understanding how to keep ourselves safe from these incredibly evil acts that our fellow humans are capable of unleashing on other humans. It's just tragic. So let's go there. In case I didn't introduce myself, I'm Marilia. This is Salto del Gato. I want to welcome you to my YouTube channel, and this is my Gumshoe playlist. Now, in my two previous videos on this crime spree, I have given a chronology of the events. I've told the story, and I think gone over the cast of characters. I even recently shot a follow-up video because of some of the bizarre claims that have begun to surface in the news recently that have been revealed in the trial. I also was able to get a hold of the text exchange that was presented yesterday, which was May 8th in the courthouse. The entire day yesterday, they basically had one person on the stand. He was a federal agent, and he just went through the entire day just kind of reviewing the history of text and email between Lori and Chad. And they got all of that out of Lori's iCloud accounts. I'm going to have fun with these because a lot of those texts are basically Lori and Chad sexting each other or LARPing, which I have to confess I knew nothing about, but it's live action role-playing, and it's kind of character-driven gameplay. Did Chad and Lori dress up in costume? That's more than I want to imagine. But wait for that video, because we're going to laugh and we're going to need laughter to heal from this. I hope that Lori and Chad realize what a laughing stock they've made of themselves, and anybody who gave them any type of remote attention or considered them to be anything close to credible. They are the topic of comedians throughout the world, and I hope they enjoy being laughed at. I'm not a cruel person, but those two deserve to be humiliated, in my humble opinion. Now, after reading the texts that have recently been disclosed, I don't see how Lori or her lawyers could even suggest that she was being manipulated by Chad. It is very obvious in these exchanges that she was not only a willing participant, but in some cases she took the initiative on how things might go. When I did the first video on this crime spree, I thought I would do a little 20-minute overview, blah, 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 and it would be done because it really was so bizarre I didn't want to go into it. But then the story began to unfold. It was on TV, it was on video, I began to follow it, and I was just astounded. So this is probably going to turn into a minimum of 4 videos, maybe more. But in this video, I want to get to know the victims. So let's go there. And like I said, I know that we don't ignore the victims or avoid talking about the victims. And if we do, it's because of the tragedy. In previous videos, I tried to share the little I knew about the victims, which always in these cases is barely anything. Some of it is just that people want to respect their privacy. But let's start first with the person who was taken off the planet first, Charles Vallow. He was a hard-working man. He worshipped the ground Lori walked on, so much so that he converted to her religion so that he could build a life with her. He was a very good provider because he made it possible for Lori to live in large, beautiful homes. She didn't have to work, and apparently she was able to spend a lot of time attending church events, reading Chad Daybell's books, hosting podcasts, and eventually participating in some of these satellite fringe offshoot groups with other fellow Mormons, although these groups were not sanctioned by the LDS Church. Anyway, Charles made it possible for Lori to find plenty of time on her hands to get involved in these kinds of things. His work took him away from home quite a bit. A lot of his time was spent traveling to other states. But they were financially able to hire babysitters as needed, or as she often did, she would get Tylee to be the caregiver for JJ, or she used her brother Alex as a babysitter. I'm not clear on all of that, but I know that Alex spent a lot of time at Lori and Charles' home. What a great guy Charles must have been to put up with all that. Lori was not without some income through Tylee because she received Social Security benefits from Tylee's deceased father, Joseph Ryan. I think that was the $2,000 that was alluded to or mentioned somewhere along the line. However, $2,000 was peanuts for Lori and her lifestyle. And then there's JJ. Now, JJ was a special needs child, and I'm not sure if there was any kind of financial incentive for his adopted parents. I know some states do provide such a thing, and I'm not in any way implying that that was the reason why Charles adopted JJ. I'm just merely saying that the family had resources above and beyond Charles' substantial income and what he provided. Now, Charles, as I had mentioned in my other videos, was 13 years older than Lori. He had already had 2 sons with the previous wife. And if these children were not adults at that time that him and Lori got together, well then I assume he had to pay child support for them. So the family also had expenses. Large, beautiful homes, babysitters, child support. Well, you get the picture. I think at one time, Charles Vallow and Lori moved the entire family to Hawaii. Now, I've lived in Hawaii, and it's very expensive in Hawaii. But they moved there, and I think it was because Lori wanted to start some kind of a juice business that ultimately failed. I don't think they purchased property there. I think they just rented. However, it was a family of 4, and that can be financially tough. So eventually, they relocate to the mainland. And now their history takes place between Texas and Arizona. So I think when they originally met, they lived in Texas, and then they moved to Hawaii, and then they moved back to Texas. And then at some point, the marriage begins to fall apart. Lori leaves the marriage for about 58 days, and she leaves JJ with Charles. Now, Charles is caring for a young special needs child, and he has to travel for work. So he gets his sister, Kay, JJ's grandmother, to help. But he negotiates with Lori to return, and he offers to provide another big, beautiful house for her if she agreed to take care of JJ. She agrees. Now, I'm not sure if that's when they moved to Arizona, but the family now has Charles' 2 sons who were approaching adulthood, Lori's almost adult son, a preteen pubescent daughter, and a very young elementary-aged special needs child. Obviously, there was stress. I'm not sure why Charles thought it was a good idea to commit to raising a special needs child when you already had your plate full with 4 children from 3 different marriages. He just must have been an incredibly kind soul. And after all, this was his family because it's his sister Kay's grandson, and he took on that responsibility. But obviously, he didn't really understand the woman that he had married. He had no way of knowing that he was actually condemning himself and JJ to end up in a horrific nightmare. Let's get to know Tylee. Tylee was a typical teenager, but she was a sickly child most of her life. Now, curiously, I think she had some pancreatic issues, as did her mother's sister, Stacy. Stacy had dietary and diabetic issues, and ultimately she lost her life, allegedly, due to natural causes associated with her diabetes. So back to Tylee. She was a typical teenager. She's probably a bit moody, hormonal, perhaps has a streak of rebelliousness, or at least isn't always cooperative, as teenagers tend to be. She might have been a bit mouthy, and we know that Laurie doesn't handle being challenged very well. So for poor Tylee, it appears that there wasn't much that she could do to please her mother. In one of the text messages, Laurie points out that Tylee is no longer herself because she was kind and cleaned her room and cooperated. The people who orbited in Tylee's environment were mostly her mother's associates. So these included the despicable Melanie Gibb and her partner, who in her interviews can't seem to even hide her distaste for this poor child. Melanie Gibb openly says that Tylee did not care for her and barely acknowledged Melanie Gibb. Tylee must have been wise beyond her years in this respect, because her instincts about Melanie Gibb were right on point. Melanie Gibb says that she made efforts to engage Tylee, but Tylee ignored her and never even acknowledged her presence. Melanie Gibbs followed this family around, so she took trips to Hawaii to visit them, and to Idaho, and to Utah, and visited them in overnight stays in Arizona. Tylee didn't like Melanie. That was obvious. I think Tylee sensed Melanie Gibb was no better than a female canine infected with rabies. She had good instincts, but unfortunately, they didn't help her. She also did not like Chad Daybell, and even warned her mother that he was a fraud. Unbeknownst to her, that pretty much sealed her fate with her mother and her gravedigger boyfriend, Chad. Tylee rejected Chad. Chad shares in a conversation with someone or in a text exchange that Tylee did not like people and she did not care for him. So, of course, Chad gave Tylee a very dark rating on his pseudo-Ghostbuster scale. So here again, we see that Tylee had a good head and a good instinct for evil, and she was able to sense it in people. Unfortunately for her, she became an obstacle for Laurie, who didn't take well when people crossed her or disagreed with her or in any way interfered with what Laurie wanted. The only reason Laurie tolerated Tylee was because of that Social Security money she received from her deceased father, Joseph. Now, we have no information on how Tylee got along with her stepfather, Charles Vallow. We see images online and we hear accounts from people who interacted with them in public that Tylee appeared to have a playful and affectionate moments that she shared with her youngest adopted sibling. I have granddaughters that in similar ages where there's a large span of years between them, and the youngest and the oldest, the dynamics aren't always peaceful. My grandchildren love each other and eventually find ways of coexisting and complying with each other, but it does create a bit of stress and tension in the home environment. The dynamics are interesting. So I'm sure that these two children, Tylee and JJ, squabbled and annoyed each other. I'm sure that that was part of the dynamics, that it wasn't always peaceful at home for the kids. And in the case of a special needs child, their reaction can be, quite difficult. And Laurie was forcing Tylee to stay home and be homeschooled or do online school and then take care of JJ. Poor Tylee had no escape Her father was dead. She probably had no interaction with her father's side of the family. Her mother's family was just as crazy as her mother was, and her stepfather was gone most of the time. So who could she turn to? There was no one. And then let's talk about JJ. What an unfortunate set of circumstances met him in this life. He was born to a set of parents who were dealing with their own dysfunction and addiction issues. Never were they prepared to be parents. Their issues caused him to experience a premature delivery and a low birth rate, which resulted in him developing significant special needs throughout his young life. Now, I'm not sure what age it was when he came to live with Lori and Charles, but that must have been a transition for him, a difficult one. It sounds like he had already bonded with his grandmother Kay and her husband Larry. Then he is moved to another state to live with this ready-made family. I don't have any idea how that must have been for him. By all the accounts that we know and that we see online and that we hear from people who interacted with them in public, Lori was being this really wonderful, picturesque, ideal parent to this child. That's what the pictures and the stories of public interactions relay to us. But in private, though, she always referred to JJ as her husband's nephew's drug baby. So when those doors were closed and there was no one home but her and Tylee and JJ, what was it really like for him? I wonder. Then there's Tammy. From all we know about her, she was a mild, congenial, passive, submissive person who enjoyed her simple life. She was a wonderful mother, a dutiful wife, and a good Mormon. She understood how to work with computers and software programs, and she seemed to like to. She liked to dance and keep healthy. She was involved in clogging practices with her clogging dance group, and she took Zumba classes. She kept herself busy. In fact, she was preparing to run a 5K marathon, so she was pretty physically fit. On the surface, it seemed that she was satisfied to live a low-key life married to a gravedigger who barely could support his family. She stepped up to the plate and became the primary breadwinner and also the source of health insurance for the family. So what exactly did Chad contribute? This is just me passing judgment, but Chad seemed to be the same kind of parasitic loser for Tammy as Lori was for Charles. They both lived off of someone else's labor. Tammy kept her house running and raised 5 children. The larvae, that is Chad, used Tammy to keep his little fantasy world of becoming a prolific author going. But he failed at becoming that prolific writer. So he turned to conning people. I think Tammy sensed he was full of bat dung, and perhaps she began to drift away from his fantastical claims and writings and involvement in these fringe groups. She didn't make it to many appearances with him to promote the bizarre, predatory world that he had created in his failed books, that he then converted into a religion. But then isn't that how most religions start, with somebody's story? So Chad resorts to convincing people that this world he wrote about and spoke about was real. He joins with other crazed con artists in this genre and establishes himself as a self-proclaimed prophet. I don't think Tammy bought any of it. Sweet, gentle Tammy probably reconciled that she was married to this weirdo and ignored a lot of what he was doing. I guess she felt as long as she and her children were safe, it was harmless. I mean, they'd been married over 30 years and had 5 children. Little did she know, she was living with the devil incarnate, and in a situation where she was in danger, where her worst nightmare would unravel. And I don't know what the status of the safety of Chad's children would ultimately have been, because curiously, everybody else's children were dark spirits, and we know what that meant. They were taken off of the earth. What about his? When was Lori going to turn around and point the finger at his kids and grade them on their scale as dark? We don't know. We never will know, because fortunately for them, these two were caught and stopped. Now, as I see this, and here goes your warning, I'm about to go on a rant, it's clear to me there's one word that stands out in this, and it's indoctrination. That's what's taking place in these and other similar groups, because that's what this is all about. This is not the first cult, and it won't be the last one that springs up and seduces vulnerable people and indoctrinates them. And then, like I said, that's what takes place in these groups. And it's good to emphasize that word, indoctrination. This happens frequently with religious and political groups, but specifically religious groups indoctrinate people into their beliefs. Religions do so generationally. They are adept at conditioning the minds of their members and indoctrinating them to alter their behaviors and bring them into alignment with the doctrine that the group adheres to. Let's just call it what it is, the manifesto. They get people to agree to believe their story, a story that somebody comes up with. It doesn't matter how fantastical it is, people become programmed. They are convinced by the stories from either ancient books or currently trending novels that no one can know them but this God outside of them. They allow their individual identity to become obliterated by some self-proclaimed prophet, and their behavior falls in line with the group. This, my friend, is why I follow no structured religion. There is no need for anyone to come to me and present God's case. I believe we all have an open communication to our own personal relationship with whatever we perceive God to be for us. We don't need a middleman. So please don't come and preach to me. I won't preach to you, but I'll respect anything that you believe. These people read stuff and then follow it. Literally, they don't think that this might be metaphorical, inspirational, creative writing. They don't think for themselves, because in these writings, they specifically and deliberately are written in a way that they build in a warning that if you entertain your own thoughts separate from the groups and do not follow what is written in the manifestos, then you are going to be devoured by demons. Never mind that they themselves are the demons that do the devouring. I warned you. I slipped down that slippery slope of ranting, but I've climbed out of it. So, in closing, I wanted to spend a little time thinking about those who succumbed to these crazed people and lost their lives. Once individuals have been extracted from the earth, all of the attention seems to divert to the perpetrators and the people who extracted them. And I didn't want to miss the opportunity to refocus us on what this is all about. This is all about individuals who, in the prime of their lives, and even sometimes before they were even getting started on life, their story ended abruptly. Thank you so much for indulging me. I really appreciate it.